What is my ideal book collection? If you asked me this about a year ago, I probably would have told you about how I wanted to eventually get to a point where I had an entire room just dedicated to books. Walls and walls full of bookshelves, which in turn were full of books of all the stories I'd read and all the stories I hope to eventually read. Basically, my ideal book collection was a large one. But recently, I've had a bit of a change of heart. I'm willing to admit that I'm kind of weird. And don't judge me, but there are times when I find myself just sitting over there at the opposite side of this room, and just randomly, I'd start staring at my bookshelf, looking at all the books there and smiling. Because I just love my books and my collection that much. So sure, I love my book collection as a whole, but there's still something that's a bit off. So the other day I was here with my boyfriend and I just randomly felt like talking about all my books, even though he doesn't really like books. It's just
That's not true, yeah.
Anyway, I was talking to my boyfriend about my books, basically just going through every single book on my bookshelf and just talking about it. And there were some books, when I reached them, I would just go on and on about how much I loved them, exactly what I loved about them, how they affected me, and why those books are just such great books. Yet there were other books which, when I reached them, I would say something along the lines of it was okay and just move on to the next one, or just skip it completely. And there were other books still that I also could just go on and on and on about, but not about anything good. I only actually had bad things to say about them. And I don't really have room in my collection for books that didn't really stick with me or affect me in any way, or for books that I can only associate negative thoughts with. Which is why I went through my collection to see if there were any that I could possibly get rid of. Books that other people really enjoyed, but I just didn't really enjoy myself personally. Books that I was extremely happy to experience once, but never feel like I'll reread ever again. Books that were passed on to me that I was excited to read once upon a time, but I've lost interest in. And books that are just plain terrible. Aside from getting rid of books, I'm also going to try to be more critical about the books that I have decided to keep on my shelves. Books that may not be some of my favorites, or books that I may not have read yet, but eventually might need to decide whether to keep or to give away. There are definitely books here that probably don't belong here, but baby steps. And I'm also going to try not to add any books to my shelves unless I already know that I absolutely love them. There are other ways to read books. You don't need to buy a book before you read it. I can always read from the library. I can always buy a book on the Kindle so it doesn't take up any physical space. I can always borrow books from my friends. I don't need to buy them outright. And if I love a book enough to buy a nice physical copy of it after I've already read it, then it probably deserves to be on this shelf anyway. And those are the only types of books that I eventually want to keep on this shelf. While a lot of people's ideal book collection is probably a gigantic one, and while there's nothing wrong with that, I've come to realize that I'm just not one of those people. Because my ideal book collection is not one with a lot of books, not one with all the books that I've read, but one with only the books that I absolutely love. So, what's your ideal book collection?